Welcome to B4.1, Adaptation to Environment. Our two essential questions are, how are the adaptations and habitats of species related? And what causes the similarities between ecosystems within a terrestrial biome? First up, B4.1.1, habitat as a place in which a community, species, population, or organism lives. The habitat of a species can include both its geographical location, where in the world the organism lives. For example, this elephant lives in likely Tanzania, where you can see Mount Kilimanjaro behind it. Okay, as well as the physical conditions. It lives in a grassland, savanna type of ecosystem, and where within the ecosystem here in the shadow of the mountain. The environment of an organism is everything around it, including other living organisms and non-living materials such as air, water, and rock. So together, living and non-living things together make up the environment. Living things, of course, being our biotic factors, non-living abiotic. Remember that bio means life. Biotic factors are going to dominate in ecosystems with dense communities of organisms, like this tropical rainforest. You can see it's going to be controlled by the interactions with all of these living things, versus abiotic factors will dominate in ecosystems in extreme habitats where population densities are low, like a desert or taiga, where there's much lower levels of living organisms. We're going to have the abiotic factors, the snow, the rocks, the air, the water dominate. There are two specific examples that IB would like you to be familiar with in terms of adaptations of organisms to their abiotic environment. The first one is going to be grasses and their adaptations to sand dunes. Now, sand dunes are mounds of sand. They can form from wind-blown sand in deserts and at the tops of beaches. Let's look at some challenges for plants that live on sand dunes. First up, water conservation. We know if you're in a desert, you're going to have very low levels of precipitation. And if you're on a coastline, you've got all of this salt water from the ocean here and much less fresh water. Plus, it's a sandy environment, and so water is not going to be retained as well in sand as it would be in soil. All of the holes between the sand particles are going to allow for water to drain out. Next up, challenge of high salt concentrations, especially for these sand dunes near the oceans. Remember, if there's high salt concentrations in the soil, that's going to lead to water moving from low to high concentration of solutes and moving out of the plant when in fact we need water to go into the plant. Next up, sand accumulation. I already mentioned sand retains little water. It also has little organic material in it, which helps store water. And so it's going to be a very difficult environment for these plants to survive. Now, these grasses are the dominant plant on beach dunes. They have some special adaptations to this very challenging environment. First up, they have a thick, waxy cuticle on leaves to reduce transpiration. Remember that transpiration is just evaporation directly from a plant leaf. And so a waxy layer on these grasses is going to help reduce the amount of water vapor that is evaporating out of that plant. Secondly, those stomata are in indentations or furrows where humid air can remain even in windy conditions. Now here's a cross section of a leaf, and you can see here these indentations at the base of which are going to be a stomata. And remember that stomata is where gas exchange occurs in a leaf as well as water loss. And so we can reduce water loss. So think of if a grass is on a windy beach, right? The wind is going to blow past here, and this is going to be sort of a more sheltered area that's able to maintain a higher humidity. And that's where that stomata is. And so less water is lost through that adaptation. Next up, leaves that can roll up during droughts, creating a humid chamber and reducing the surface area exposed to wind. So just picture these leaves kind of rolling up on themselves to try to prevent water loss. They also have tough sclerenchyma tissue to prevent wilting during droughts. Now remember, most plants stay upright because they have that tough lignified xylem where water is moving through. But these grasses have this tough sclerenchyma tissue in high amounts. And this is going to help that even when there's low amounts of water moving through the xylem, it's still going to be able to stay upright and not wilt because it has all of this extra colored pink here, sclerenchyma. Next up, they have rhizomes. These are underground stems. They grow upwards as sand accumulates and extend deep into the dune to obtain water. Remember that sand dunes are constantly shifting. And so as the level of sand is going up or down, depending on where the wind is blowing, those plants are going to be able to adapt to those changing levels of sand with these specialized stems. And lastly, they have accumulation of carbohydrates known as fructans in root and leaf cells to increase osmotic potential and thus water uptake. So remember, water is going to go from low to high solute concentration through osmosis. And so if they can have accumulation of carbohydrates and increase the solute concentration in the roots, that's then going to allow for water to move along the gradient into the plant. Okay, and the second example I would like you to be familiar with is adaptations of trees to mangrove swamps. Now, note mangrove swamps develop on the coastlines, typically where mud is accumulating, and you're going to see that these are swamps flooded with seawater at high tide. They tend to occur here where it's warm, near the equator. You can see here in red where the mangroves are. Because we have a freshwater environment that's inundated twice a day with tides with salt water, we're going to have some very specialized adaptations for the plants that can live there. Challenges include waterlogged anaerobic soils. Because the soils are waterlogged, they aren't able to get oxygen into the soils to provide oxygen to the roots. There's also going to be, of course, a high salt concentration since we have daily flooding with seawater, evaporation leading to high concentration of salt in the mud. So mangrove trees, as seen here, have some special adaptations for these locations. Number 1, they can secrete excess salt from salt glands in their leaves. Number 2, their root epidermis is coated in suberin or cork, which reduces permeability to salt and prevents excessive absorption. So just picture the cork in a wine bottle is preventing any liquid from moving in and out. And so if we have this cork layer around the roots, that's just going to help prevent salt from moving in when it's flooded during the high tides. There are cable roots growing close to the soil surface where there's the most oxygen. You can see these roots kind of growing out along the surface, side to side. And then look at these crazy looking little towers. These are part of the mangroves. They're called pneumatophores. They're vertical root branches. They grow up into the air and can help absorb oxygen for use in roots. Picture snorkels, right? If you got your face down in the water and you have a snorkel so you can take in oxygen, that's basically what these pneumatophores are. They're snorkels for the mangroves. Next, they have stilt roots. They grow out in a downward arch from the central trunk, and they're able to buttress the tree in the soft mud. Okay, because this is muddy from all of the daily seawater indentation, a normal tree might easily fall over in that soft mud, but this just makes a little stabilizing buttressing. Okay, the seeds are large and buoyant, and so they can be carried by the ocean to distant muddy shores. And similarly, like we saw in the grasses, we can have accumulation of mineral ions and carbon compounds such as mannitol, which increase the osmotic potential of root and leaf cells, similarly allowing water absorption from a very saline environment. Next up, abiotic variables that affect species distribution. Adaptations of plants and animals suit them for living in some places and not others, giving each species a range of tolerance. We're going to see that plants have 6 abiotic factors that affect where a plant can live. Those include the temperature, water availability, light intensity, soil pH, soil salinity, and the availability of mineral nutrients like nitrates and phosphates. Animals, on the other hand, just have 2 abiotic factors that affect where they can live, which are temperature and water availability, both of which are shared with plants. Let's look at some examples. Plants from tropical regions would not survive frosts in the north, while plant species from the north have chemicals in their cells that act like antifreeze, and they prevent frost damage caused by the formation of ice crystals, allowing them to live in a place with freezing temperatures. If those northern plants were placed into the tropics, they would transpire excessively and lose all of that water, and their method of photosynthesis would be very inefficient at high temperatures. And so plants adapted to each region can only grow in that specific region. Animals similarly have adaptations to where they're able to live. The large ears of elephants with these dense networks of surface blood help to dissipate heat in hot climates. So the heat that's generated through metabolism travels through the blood because remember, water is a good heat conductor and blood is water-based. And when it gets here to the elephant's ear, all of that warm blood is able to release the heat as it comes close to the surface of the skin in this large surface area of the elephant's ear. Polar bears, on the other hand, picture them, they have relatively small ears, which helps minimize heat loss in Arctic habitats. Desert rats have longer loops of Henle in their kidneys to minimize water loss in arid conditions. We'll talk more about the loop of Henle when we cover the kidney. Okay, a species range of tolerance can be investigated experimentally. There are 2 DBQs in the textbook that you should be familiar with. This first one is looking at distribution of a variety of species along this cross-section of a beach-type habitat with a rock pool, some sand, an edge of ledge. This kite diagram shows by the width of the kite the relative amount of each of these populations in that location. So for example, Enteromorpha species are going to live right up here above the sand, okay, whereas you can see this Sargassum muticum are going to live in this large shallow rock pool, predominantly large numbers of them. So these red marks show not just the distribution, but also the thickness indicates like the number or the abundance of those organisms. Okay, you should also be able to take a look at a graph that has 2 different lines superimposed and be able to differentiate between them and answer questions about them. Next up, conditions required for coral reef formation. So remember that corals are animals and they are in a mutualistic relationship with zooxanthellae algae. So this animal coral polyp relies on this relationship for the products of photosynthesis from the zooxanthellae. Similarly, zooxanthellae rely on the products of respiration from the coral, as well as providing a safe place to live. Now we're going to see that in order for those corals to grow, we're going to need less than 50-meter depths of water, so there's enough light, because that zooxanthellae algae is mutualistic. The coral needs it, and so it can't be too deep where there's not enough light. Secondly, we need to have a pH above 7.8, below which we wouldn't have enough calcium carbonate able to be deposited into the skeleton due to the acidic conditions. Salinity, we need 32 to 42 parts per thousand of dissolved ions to avoid osmotic problems. Clarity, turbidity would prevent penetration of light, so the water must be clear. And lastly, temperature. Note where coral reefs are growing closer to the equator, we need water that's between 23 and 29 degrees Celsius, so both the coral and its zooxanthellae remain healthy. All right, for any given temperature and rainfall pattern, one natural ecosystem is likely to develop. Based on the adaptations of those species, we can look at the average annual temperature, the annual precipitation, and be able to predict which biome will appear in that particular location. So you should be able to answer a question. If, for example, I was to ask you, what biome would you expect to find with an average annual temperature of 25 degrees Celsius? So you'd start by coming over here to 25, okay, and 100 centimeters of annual precipitation. And so you would look where that line matched up with the 100, and you would be able to tell me savanna. Okay, a biome is defined as all ecosystems of a specific type with a specific climate, vegetation, and animal life. The most likely ecosystem given any particular combination of temperature and precipitation can be shown using a graph like this, and I have seen this show up on the IB exam before, so make sure that you can use this. Now, biomes may be widely separated in the world. Here we see 2 biomes, one in America and one in Africa. They're both hot deserts, low precipitation. Note that these cacti and these euphorbia look incredibly similar, and they have a lot of the same adaptations to that particular biome. However, they do not have a common ancestor that shares those same adaptations. In fact, these adaptations are due to convergent evolution. Because they had similar selective pressures in these similar dry, hot biomes over millions of years, both of these species independently evolved to have these same types of features, right? The leaves turned into spines. They have this thick, waxy cuticle, all the things that make cacti adapted to desert conditions. All right, you need to be familiar with these 6 biomes. You should be able to describe the temperature, precipitation, light intensity, and seasonal variation for each of them. With tropical forests, you can probably picture a tropical place, maybe like Hawaii. Temperate forest, I picture Oregon. Taiga, I think of as northern Canada. Hot desert, maybe picture the Sahara. Grasslands, then I picture Kenya. And then the tundra, you can picture the very north and south poles. All right, this is a climate graph, which can be used to show the average monthly temperature and precipitation for a specific location over the course of a year. Note that our average monthly temperature is going to be plotted by a line. Now, this is specific to Portland, Oregon, and you can see here each of these numbers representing a month of the year. So 1 being January, 2 being February, etc. Here, we've plotted the points for the average temperature at each of those months. And you can see that Portland has warmer summers and cooler winters. Note then precipitation is listed as bars, and you can see that this y-axis is for temperature and this y-axis is for precipitation. And you can see here that Portland has dry summers and very rainy almost the rest of the year. Now, you should be able to look at this climate graph, answer questions. Remember, if you are in the southern hemisphere, right, you're going to see temperatures that look just the opposite because the seasons are reversed, and the June, July, August months are actually going to be the winter in the southern hemisphere. So keep in mind and don't be thrown off by that if you see a graph that looks like it's the opposite direction. Hot deserts are characterized by very high daytime temperatures, much colder nights. Rainfall totals per year are very low. There can be long periods without any precipitation. Soil development is very limited, so there's little organic matter, few soil organisms. We're going to look specifically at the saguaro cactus and the fennec fox as examples of organisms adapted to these conditions. So first up, a plant, the saguaro. It has a wide-spreading root system to collect water up to 30 meters from the stem. It has deep tap roots that collect water from up to 1 meter down in the subsoil. There are fat stems with storage tissue to conserve water after infrequent desert rains. The pleated stems allow shrinkage in droughts and swelling after rains. The vertical orientation of stems reduce interception of the sunlight at midday and maximize sunlight at cooler times of the day. The thick waxy cuticle on the stem epidermis, or outside layer, reduces transpiration. The leaves are reduced to spines to reduce the surface area for transpiration and prevent herbivores from eating the slow-growing cactus. They also have a special type of metabolism called cam metabolism, where their stomata opens at night and then closes during the heat of the day, which allows them to reduce transpiration, water loss. Okay, now let's look at how an animal, the fennec fox, is adapted to those hot deserts. They are nocturnal in order to avoid the highest temperatures during daylight hours. They build an underground den where it can stay cool during the day. It has long, thick hair to provide heat insulation both for the cold nights and the hot days. There's hair covering the pads of the feet to provide insulation when walking on very hot sand. They have a pale-colored coat that reflects sunlight. A darker coat would absorb it. They have large ears that radiate heat. They help keep body temperature down. And they have a variable ventilation rate that can be increased to more than 600 breaths per minute, panting, to cause heat loss by evaporation. Last two are going to be adaptations of a plant and an animal to the tropical rainforest. Note the tropical rainforest is characterized by high temperatures, high precipitation, high light intensity. So let's look at the yellow Meranti tree and the spider monkey as examples of organisms adapted to these conditions. So first up, the Meranti. It's a species of tree, can grow over 100 meters high, overtopping other trees in order to avoid competition for light. It has a trunk of hard, dense wood to provide support, especially against the wind stress. The trunk is buttressed at the base to provide increased support because rainforest soils are shallow. They have a smooth trunk to shed rainwater rapidly. Broad oval leaves with pointed tips that shed rainwater rapidly. Okay, their leaves are evergreen, which take advantage of ideal conditions for photosynthesis throughout the year. The enzymes of photosynthesis are adapted to tolerate temperatures as high as 35 degrees Celsius. And they produce flowers and seeds in large quantities, only about 1 year in 5, with none in those other 4 years, in order to deter species that eat the seeds. And lastly, the spider monkey, adapted to life in the tropical rainforest. It has long arms and legs for climbing and reaching for fruit, flexible shoulders allowing swinging from tree to tree. It has large hook-like hands without thumbs that can grasp branches and lianas and pick fruit. Okay, they have feet that act like extra hands, grasping branches, allowing the arms to be used for feeding or other purposes. They have a long tail that can grip onto branches and act like a fifth hand. They have a highly developed larynx, allowing a wide range of sounds to be made to communicate in the dense rainforest canopy. Okay, they sleep at night and they're active during the daytime when vision is most acute and distances can be judged between branches. Lastly, they can breed at any time of the year as there is a constant supply of fruit, nuts, seeds, buds, flowers, insects, and eggs. All right, that does it for B4.1. Good luck out there.